Hello, I think that was a weird intro. Welcome to my series on dissecting the House of Night series. That's a weird way of putting that. I'll work on these intros. I gotta workshop them. But today I want to talk about just the concept of a House of Night. As with previous videos, this will probably be done over time in multiple recording sessions. So if the clips are kind of all over the place, that's why. But I had enough thoughts that I wanted to start recording and just talk about some stuff. I do have notes this time because to talk about the House of Night and as like a school, as a system, a world building element, if you will, I need to talk about stuff like the distribution of House of Nights in the world and like the curriculum of the House of Night. So we're gonna get into that. First topic, the concept of this like global system of schools. The way vampirism works in this world is you aren't bitten and you become a vampire. It isn't a thing that's done to you. You have junk DNA that at a random point during puberty, it will trigger this transformation. You will start turning into a vampire. The change takes 4 years, but a fledgling vampire, which is a newly marked vampire who has not completed the change, a fledgling vampire will die. They'll reject the change instead of completing it if they aren't in like relative proximity to an adult vampire. And obviously, if you have a whole bunch of fledglings, you need a bunch of adult vampires, ergo schools. So the system that is in place, as far as is established in the books, the only system we hear about is these Houses of Night. So the way it works is they have, from the point that they're marked, which is like a vampire called a tracker finds them, they are gifted basically, not a vision, but like a lure, a draw by Nyx, where they have to find this vampire who's going to start the change, and they mark them. And from when they're marked, they're like officially going through the change, and they have roughly 24 hours from the time that they're marked to get to a House of Night or get to an adult vampire in order to not die. The concept of that is interesting, right? Like the idea that vampirism is a random thing that can happen to anybody is juicy. That's interesting. That's fun. The idea of this like time pressure of like, as soon as you're marked, you have to find your way to an adult vampire, and the easiest way to find an adult vampire is to go to a House of Night. Like that's the most reliable way to find one. That is like, it has the potential to create very high stakes from the beginning of the story. And it also creates a sense of like, it makes sense why vampires would be kind of insular, particularly fledglings, because they have to stay close to each other. They can't really wander off and do their own thing because of the risk of dying if they're away from an adult vampire for too long. And just the idea of there being, because vampirism is a worldwide thing, they have to have some system in place to ensure that all doorbell. I had to move my phone when I was answering the doorbell. I don't know if this is how it was set up before. Apologies. Anyway, it makes sense that, so vampire society is sovereign from human society. Like they have their own government and rules and all this stuff. So it makes sense that they would have something implemented to ensure that fledglings are getting to adult vampires and completing the change as often as is possible. Not every fledgling completes the change regardless of if they get to adult vampires, but that's a different topic. So the concept of a House of Night is really interesting. There's a lot to explore there. And it could be a fun thing to like develop and expand on. The way it's executed though is like there's some issues here. First of all, one of the main issues with the concept of this House of Night system is that the vampire who marks a new fledgling is an adult vampire. They're a tracker. They are specifically not allowed to escort the new fledgling to the nearest House of Night, which first of all is like, I thought it would be in vampires' best interest to make sure that as many fledglings as possible get to a House of Night and complete the change, because vampires can't have children. People randomly having this junk DNA and beginning to change is the vampire birth rate. essentially. And they have a small population. Or like they don't, it's weird because they say they have a small population, but they live really long. If they complete the change, they can live anywhere from like 200 to, I think there's a couple vampires who've lived to be near 1,000, certainly 500 years old. We know there's vampires who are at least 500 years old. So they don't have a high birth rate, but they have a long survival rate, which would mean that they're like, it's a whole thing. Something like 10% of fledglings reject the change. So if we sat down and did the math, their population should be, like, I don't think they would actually end up having that small of a population. In any case, I would think that it would be in the vampire's best interest to ensure that as many fledglings as possible have the resources they need to complete the change. Apparently that's not the case, because the tracker just abandons the kid as soon as they're marked, and they have to find their way to the House of Night, which is a problem because the kid is immediately sick. Like, one of the signs that you're about to change is you start feeling sick, because your body is already having the symptoms of needing to be near an adult vampire. And so it's not just that this kid got marked and is like, no, and is dealing with like the emotional panic of, oh my God, I'm going to turn into a vampire and or die a horrific bloody death because my body rejects the change. But they're also like in the chapters where Zoe's going through it, she's like heavily coughing and she feels lightheaded and she has a headache and her body aches and like the light hurts her eyes. Like, she's struggling. Like, it's not a good time. And she's just abandoned to find her way to the nearest House of Night. So I'm like, that doesn't seem very conducive to ensuring that people complete the change, particularly because, like, let's just go over, okay, let's real quick look at the distribution of Houses of Night, because I said that I like the idea of it as like this global system kind of thing where like the Vampire High Council has done the work to ensure that there is something in place so that every region has a means for fledglings to get to adult vampires, complete the change, etc. Right? The problem is, first of all, important context. Quote, betrayed, I believe it's Professor Nolan, she reminded us that each of the 25 Houses of Night campuses worldwide sent their 5 strongest competitors. The sentence continues, but that's the information that matters. Each of the 25 House of Night campuses worldwide, there are only, as far as is established in Betrayed, the second book in the series, there are only 25 Houses of Night globally. Now, even before we look at the distribution, those numbers, not great. If we went just by like if you just try to distribute them per landmass, that's just not going to work very well. If we tried to distribute them per population, that's not going to work very well. And the thing is that there is no area that is like, oh, this region has vampires and this region doesn't. Everywhere in the world has vampires. It's junk DNA that can happen to anyone. It's a random mutation. So, like, there has to be distribution worldwide. Again, note, there is no indication of alternate systems in the series. We can talk about that later. But as far as is established in the series, this is it. This is how you survive the change. You get to a House of Night. There's only 25. Now, let's just list out the Houses of Night that exist. I'm going to list out the ones that are established in the original series, established and currently exist in the original series. There's a few Houses of Night that are like historical but no longer in operation, and there's a couple Houses of Night that are either not mentioned until the spin-off series or are for sure not opened until the spin-off series or like after the events of the original series. Essentially, the list I'm going to read off, it's all Houses of Night that are for sure in operation at the time of the original series, which is relevant to that 25 Houses of Night quote earlier. So in North America, we have the Tulsa House of Night, the Chicago House of Night, the Tower Grove House of Night, the New York House of Night, the San Francisco House of Night, the Pennsylvania House of Night, and the Canada House of Night. We'll get to naming conventions later. In Europe, we have the Paris House of Night, the San Clement Island is listed in the series. I'm unclear on if it is currently in operation. So we'll have an asterisk beside that one. London House of Night, Frankfurt House of Night, Bruges House of Night, Thebes House of Night. There's also a Greece House of Night. I'm not sure if those are supposed to be the same. We'll put an asterisk on that as well. Naples House of Night, Bergen House of Night, that's all the European ones. And then in Asia, there's the Japan House of Night, the Calcutta House of Night, and the Himalayan Regional House of Night. In Africa, there's the South African House of Night. In Oceania, there's the Sydney House of Night and the New Zealand House of Night. And in South America, there's none listed. So per what I just listed, if we include San Clement Island and both Greek Houses of Night, that would be, let me double check my numbers. That would be 22 schools that are for sure named and like established in the original series when we are told that there's only 25 Houses of Night globally. So there's room for between 2 to 4 more Houses of Night if San Clement Island is a historic one that's not currently in operation, and if there is in fact only one Greek House of Night and it was just weirdly referred to in text. Maybe those other 2 to 4 Houses of Night are distributed in, say, Africa and South America. That still wouldn't be enough. And regardless, even if all 4 of them were in, say, Asia, it would still mean that the entirety of Asia has roughly the same number or one more House of Night than the United States. Asia not only is bigger than the United States, it also has more people than the United States. So no matter what way you slice that math still wouldn't work. And the math that we do have, like the exact numbers we do have, is there's only 3 Houses of Night in Asia. That doesn't make any sense. Why does the United States have double the number of Houses of Night compared to Asia, the entire continent? A continent with several like hugely populous countries. I think the two countries with the largest populations in the world are in Asia. So they should probably have a lot of Houses of Night if this is in fact the only system in place. I would also like to note, just for like to fully get the picture, the 2 new Houses of Night that are mentioned in the spin-off series are a New Orleans House of Night, so another one in the States, and Prohibition Tunnels in Tulsa, so another House of Night in Tulsa. There's 2 Houses of Night in Tulsa, and there's none in South America. What do you mean? Side note, at some point, I'm going to do a bonus video on Patreon where I get like a map on a wall. I am not in the place to do that right now, but I want to get a map on the wall and put like stickers or pins or something on the map, actually visually showing where all the schools are, and then we can talk more about like what do you mean? And just generally, I want to do map stuff relating to the House of Night and like talk about geography and politics and stuff. Anyway, also for context, all of the historic Houses of Night that are like not currently in operation, they're all in Europe. So possibly San Clement Island, the Isle of Skye, the Palace of Capri, and Tiedenacht, they're all in Europe. There's, if San Clement Island, Palace of Capri, and was there another one? I thought there was Naples and Naples. That would mean that there's 3 in Italy. Why would there be as many House of Nights in Italy as there are in Asia? That really doesn't make any sense. You don't even have to think that hard about it. It just doesn't make sense. It absolutely should not be the case that more than, what would it be, 20% of the House of Nights globally are in the United States. I also want to point out, as a Canadian, the concept of there being a Canada singular House of Night is buck wild absurd. And like, to really unpack it, right? I want to talk about, from the perspective of a Canadian, what that means, right? So I'm from Prince Edward Island, Canada. Let's say when I'm 16 years old, I get marked. There's a tattoo on my forehead now. Thanks, Nix. I have to get to the Canada House of Night. It's not specified where the Canada House of Night is, but knowing American perceptions of Canada and generally global perceptions of Canada, I'm going to assume it's in Toronto, because where else would someone put it? So let's assume Toronto, because I think that's the most likely place someone would put it. It's also, if we have to have a House of Night, That's kind of the place that sort of makes the most sense if we can truly only have one. It is the most populous city in the country, and it is a city that, like, there are ways to get to it. There's flights to Toronto, there's trains to Toronto, like, you can get there. So first of all, and this isn't just a problem with Canada, this is a conceptual problem for certainly all of Canada and the United States, and also, depending on where you are, various parts of the world. I know Europe has like really great like interconnected rail systems and stuff, but if you have to travel extremely far distance in 24 hours from the moment you're marked, you need to have money. You do need to have money. So me as a 16-year-old, I'm thinking back to my life as a 16-year-old. If I was marked and I had to get to Toronto from Prince Edward Island, I have to get to Toronto in 24 hours. I don't know if we have direct flights to Toronto. I think we do. We have one airport on the island, first of all. So I have to get to the one airport. I come from a poor family. We don't have a car. That's our first problem. So one, I definitely can't drive. Even if I could do the drive in 24 hours, which you theoretically can do if you do not stop and the weather is good. We'll get to conversations about the weather. Don't worry. You could conceptually do it in 24 hours with a car. It would suck. You would want to have someone driving with you so that you could take turns, particularly if you are coughing up a lung and slowly dying the entire time. But to do that, you do have to have a car, which I didn't. My family didn't have a car and no one in my house drove. So that's immediately out. Okay, shit. I have to get to an airport then, for sure. So I have to find my way to the Charlottetown airport. I either need to bum a ride from a relative on extremely short notice, or I have to cab it, which is expensive. Again, I am poor. Neither of these options is good. I also have to be able to afford a last-minute flight to Toronto. Direct if I can, because I don't want to gamble with layovers, right? I want to get to Toronto as fast as possible to get to the House of Night so I don't drown in my own blood rejecting the change. I'm not going to look up what those prices are right now. I know it's going to be pretty expensive. Flying in Canada is very expensive. Again, I am poor. Maybe my parents would burn basically whatever savings they had set aside for me for my first year of university, and they would put all of that towards ensuring that I can travel. But bear in mind that in the world of House of Night, maybe we'll have a video dedicated to talking about this concept, but in the world of House of Night, maybe I'll unpack it in this video actually. Humans, it's presented that it is very common for human families when they learn that their child is a fledgling, their child has been marked, they reject their child. Because of like vampire phobia type thing. People hate vampires, are scared of vampires. If they find out their kid is turning into a vampire, they immediately reject them. We can unpack that, but that means that probably a lot of parents are not funding their child's travel. They're not going to drive their kid to the airport. They're not going to give their kid the car to drive themselves to the airport. They're not going to give their kid money to get to the airport or to get on a plane. So me, 16 years old, I don't have a credit card of my own. I don't have a job. I have very little money. I have to get to an airport and on a plane and get to Toronto in 24 hours. Let's assume that I manage all of that, right? I somehow manage it. Now imagine that it's January. One of the worst of months for winter in Canada, right? Like January is an incredibly difficult month, weather-wise, temperature-wise. It's an awful month. I have to get to Toronto in 24 hours by plane. Note, PEI does not have trains. I don't have the option to take a train in this scenario. I have to fly because I can't drive. That means that I have to hope that my plane doesn't get delayed or canceled, which means that nowhere in between Prince Edward Island and Toronto can have significantly inclement weather that would delay the flight. That doesn't happen often. Flights get delayed a lot in Canada. Flights get canceled a lot in Canada. So I have to hope that by some miracle, I not only can afford to get to the airport, afford to get a flight last minute enough to get me to Toronto in 24 hours. I then also have to hope that the flight doesn't get delayed. And then after all of that happens, I have to navigate my way through Toronto to wherever the House of Night is. The death toll for fledglings from Prince Edward Island would be really bad. I'm just going to say that, because even if I could drive, let's say I was going to drive to Moncton and take a train, or I was just going to drive the whole way. Regardless, I have to have good weather to drive. Weather is really unpredictable in the winter, especially when you are driving very long distances. PEI has one land crossing, okay? It is an island. You can get off the island one of two ways in order to get to the mainland in a car. You either take a ferry, which obviously ferries will get shut down a lot if there's really bad weather, or you can take the bridge. The bridge also closes in bad weather. Granted, if you are in a low-sided vehicle, you are less likely to face bridge closures. It happens more often with high-sided vehicles because of the wind. But if there's poor visibility, if it's snowing a lot, you can't cross the fucking bridge. So I hope to fuck you don't get marked in a blizzard. And like, that's just the whole concept, is like me being from Canada. I'm like, what happens if there's a fucking blizzard when you're marked? What do you do? Like, how are you supposed to travel? Even if there was a House of Night in like Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is like a 4-hour drive away, very conceivable to get to Fredericton within 24 hours. Even for me as someone who's poor, like surely there's a ride share or something, right? Or I can get a bus. Like you can get a bus to Fredericton in like 6 or 7 hours from PEI. Granted, that runs on a schedule, so you have to worry about timing and blah, blah, blah. But it is conceivably possible. But if I get marked in the middle of a blizzard, what the fuck am I gonna do? And like, that's not even getting into, like, that's me being from Charlottetown, PEI. That is a city. It's an extremely small city, but it is a city. There is an airport in Charlottetown. This is a place that has like taxis and buses and like means to get around. What if I'm in Iqaluit, Nunavut? For those who don't know, Nunavut is one of the northern territories in Canada, and Nunavut doesn't have roads between settlements. To travel throughout Nunavut, you need a skidoo or snowmobile. We call them skidoos. You need a boat, possibly, depending on where you're going, you might need to travel by skidoo and then by boat. Or you need like a seaplane or a biplane. Is that the right word? Whatever. Some small plane that flies in the far north. You also have to hope that like the weather is conducive, because you are in, depending on how far north you are in Nunavut, you're in tundra. It's not like a super good environment to travel long distance in. And it's also like, even if you're living in Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut, it's not like you can be like, oh, I got marked at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. I have to get to Toronto by 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. And you just like trot on down to the airport and book yourself a flight. It doesn't really work like that. Like, getting in and out of Iqaluit is difficult. It's an extremely remote community because you are in the northern territories of Canada. So like, what happens to an Inuit person, because most people in Nunavut are Inuit, what happens to an Inuit person who gets marked? Do they just die? Because again, travel in and out of Nunavut is really difficult, especially if you're slowly dying. We can unpack a conversation about what alternatives would look like. We're gonna get there. This is just like a little nitpicky thing. It's not like a huge deal in terms of the logistics. I'm just confused about the naming conventions of these schools, because I read out that whole big list, right? And some of them are named after the city they're in, but then there's like Tower Grove House of Night, which I don't think Tower Grove is the name of the town or city. I think it's just called that. There's also like Himalayan Regional. What do you mean? And then there's like Japan House of Night. What do you mean? Why are some of these houses of night named after their city? Some of them are named after their country. Some of them are named after just an entire region. Like, what's the naming convention for a house of night? And like, to be clear, that's not even just a like, oh, in the States they get named after their city and in other places they get named after particularly in like Asia, they get named after like their country or region. Because like you have Chicago House of Night, right? So, okay, Chicago, Illinois, that's a city. But you also have Pennsylvania House of Night. That's a state. Why is it named after the state? Anyway, in terms of, I don't think I have a lot to talk about in terms of like the impacts of this. I don't think this is a topic that is particularly like, well, no, it kind of is. I will unpack that. This is an extremely Eurocentric and settler colonial centric perspective on the global distribution of a system like a House of Night. Why does the United States have 6 Houses of Night per the original series, but Asia only has 3? Like, what do you mean there's no Iraq House of Night? There's no House of Night in Baghdad? Like, not only is that like a very populated country, but it's a country of enormous historic and religious importance. And there's a trend in the story of houses of night being set up in like old churches and stuff. So what do you mean there's no house of night in like, or in like Bethlehem, Palestine? There's no house of night in the birthplace of Christianity when Mary is supposed to be a face of Nyx? Like, what do you mean? It demonstrates a lack of like thought of other parts of the world, and not just on the level of like, oh, I didn't think about, you know, how do people get to a house of night when they're so spread out? It's literally, I just didn't think of these places in the world when I was naming houses of night sporadically throughout various texts. The fact that there's no South American house of night is pretty egregious, in my opinion. For a system that is supposed to be very global, it shows a very narrow view when designing this and like doing this world building. And I think that feeds into a particularly a US centric mindset, because it's like, okay, here's the States, there's a bunch in the States, and then there's a bunch in some parts of Europe, not Eastern Europe. There's none in Eastern Europe, but like northern-ish, and like a bunch in Western Europe, and that's about it. We don't go any further east than like Greece. So it's like places that sound cool or like familiar and comfortable to someone from the States. Whereas like other parts of the world, again, like Asia, Africa, South America, you know, the primarily brown countries, they just aren't really thought of, particularly like it's a thing in the series when they talk about the House of Night is they like is always bragging about how like beautiful and sophisticated and like old European the houses of night are. And when reading it, I don't think much about it, but now when I'm looking at these lists, it's like, what about like the elegance and beauty and history of, again, a place like Palestine or Iraq or India, or, you know, all these places in the world that have these incredibly rich, long histories that are just kind of like not acknowledged very much. I think there are implications to that. Again, it's just reflective of US-centric, Eurocentric views of the world. And while I don't think this series is doing anything by itself, I think it is building on and perpetuating those ideas. Now, in terms of the, like, what would redoing this look like? First of all, the biggest solution would be to just establish, even in an offhand comment, that other parts of the world have other systems, right? This is what works in these parts of the world. It is especially effective in the US and parts of Europe. Great, cool, I'm not going to question that. But then, you know, places like Canada where travel is really difficult, they have different systems in place. Okay, cool, thanks. That's all I need to know. And you could even get into like, you know, different parts of the world might have different systems for rearing fledglings that is more rooted in their personal culture and history. Okay, sure. Like that would explain why there's no House of Night anywhere in the Middle East. Gotcha, they have their own thing going on. Okay, it would have been like just a very simple way to brush this aside and make me not lose my mind wondering like, what the fuck does a fledgling do if they're marked in Kazakhstan? The other thing, I'm thinking particularly in relation to the US, because there are a lot of houses of night in the United States, but even still it's an inadequate number of houses of night, not only based on like population density, but based on distribution. Like there's no house of night in the Northwest. So like if you're in Seattle and you get marked, either you gotta hope you get a really quick flight, or sorry, you die. Maybe not having alternate systems in place, but having different community things going on. So like, for example, I touched on how it's presented as like very common that human families will reject their fledgling child when they're marked. And so the fledgling child kind of has to like find their way on their own. I think there is something to be said for if this was specifically like a, middle to upper class white American thing, or a like Christian, particularly Christian fundamentalist thing, that would make sense to me. I'd be like, all right, sure. But then other like subcultures in the country maybe having different responses. As an example, and bearing in mind, I'm giving these examples as a white person, a white Canadian, but imagine, say, an inner city Black kid gets marked and there's no house of night anywhere nearby. They don't have the money or the means to get to a house of night. And they're kind of panicking, like, what am I going to do? And their family is like, we're going to figure this out. So-and-so has an uncle who completed the change. You're going to go live with that uncle. No, you won't get to go to a house of night. No, you won't get the same education. Or like you might be delayed in getting to that education because your uncle's going to have to figure out how to get you there. But like you will have a chance at surviving the change by being in proximity to an adult vampire. I think that would be an interesting idea of like showing how different communities respond in terms of like, factors like race and poverty and spirituality and like their own personal beliefs and values, because not everybody's going to have the same idea. And I think particularly where I mentioned in the overview video, this book is supposed to be tackling the idea of a Wiccan vampire society in the middle of the Bible Belt, but it doesn't really do anything to engage with like how would other cultures respond to this, right? I also personally think it would be, since the book also tries to deal with queer issues, that's another video. I think it would also be interesting to have some sort of system of like, I don't know if you'd call it community outreach or like neighborhood watch or like what the right term would be, but like a lot of teenagers who are gay get disowned by their families. And so imagine you're 16 years old, you got disowned by your family 2 weeks ago, you're living on the street and a tracker shows up and marks you and you're like, I don't even have money for food. How am I supposed to travel like 600 miles to the nearest house of night? What am I going to do? If there's like a system in place of maybe it's humans who are keeping an eye out for, disadvantaged teens on the street, especially queer teens on the street who get marked, and they take them in and they have, resources pulled together to get this kid where they need to go. Maybe it's an adult vampire group that does this, specifically, queer adult vampires. And they do the work to make sure that these queer teens get the support that they need so that they can get to a house of night. Maybe it's a mix of human and vampire. Whatever the case, I think it would be like, that would be a really interesting concept to explore. And it would, again, do the work to address some of the gaps in the concept of you have to get to a house of night within 24 hours, but we only have 25 of those. I think like all those ideas stacked together and like stuff within that realm, I think would do a lot to make this a little less incoherent and fucked. Because again, there's so many scenarios, like the vast majority of people who would get marked wouldn't be close enough to a house of night to get there before they die. And I think these like little suggestions would maybe make that work better. I think that's all I had for that particular topic. Again, I do want to do a whole map thing with this, but that's going to be a while. Granted, I don't know when I'm uploading this video, but from when I'm recording this video, it's going to be a while before I'm in a place where I can set up a big map and put pins or stickers or whatever on it and talk about, say the geopolitics of House of Night. Like, comment, subscribe if you want a video on the geopolitics of House of Night. Anyway, I think that's it for this topic. I might be recording right after this on another topic, but I'm running out of space on my phone, so I'm just gonna have to have a little think about how long am I gonna talk about this next topic. Same place, different day, recording another section of this video. Next thing I want to talk about in terms of the House of Night element of the world building is like the school. Literally the curriculum of the school. To start with the like intentions or potential kind of thing. I think the concept, it makes sense. Like the whole premise of vampires, and I'm sure I'll have another section where I talk more about like the vampires themselves, but the idea of the way the change works in this series is that it's kind of analogous / happens alongside of puberty. Again, I can talk about that more in another video, but the idea is that like puberty kind of, the changes of puberty trigger the changes of vampirism via the junk DNA. And so that's like fine, sure. And so of course, if you have a bunch of teenagers who are suddenly becoming vampires, well, they haven't finished their education, so let's send them to school. And then that also is like, of course, from a storytelling perspective, like the idea of going to a magical school appeals to a lot of young readers, also appeals to older readers. I fucking love magical school books. In theory, a lot of them are not, a lot of them don't live up to what I would like them to be, but that's neither here nor there. And so I think like that as like a narrative framing device and like a setting and stuff like that is really great. I really like that. And I also like the idea of like, because these are like a more insular school and it's beholden to the standards of vampire society, not whatever human society the schools exist in, at least in the case of American House of Nights, they have a better education standard than an American high school typically would. And so, you know, kids are learning things at a higher level, at a more advanced rate than they would in conventional schools. Again, cool idea, works great for like a wish fulfillment angle, and also just like it makes sense that this more insular society that has all these resources to themselves because vampires are all rich would put those resources towards the education of incoming vampires. Now, let's talk about how it's actually done, okay? First, I want to talk about like what we're told of the curriculum, okay? First, we'll go off of what classes are mentioned and marked. I could have gone through the whole series and looked through like all of the classes that are mentioned, but that would have taken a very long time, and I don't want to do that. So I just went through marked because I know Zoe gets a class schedule in that book, and there's like a couple other classes that are talked about in that book, and so I'm basing my understanding of like the canon established curriculum via marked. I know there's a couple other classes maybe mentioned in other books, but it's not that many, or they're like new classes that are implemented over the course of the series, and so it doesn't really count in terms of what is like normative for a House of Night to have. In marked, potential classes that students can take include vampire sociology. I could have a whole video where I talk about that as someone with a degree in sociology, but I'll hold off on it right now. Drama, sketching, music, English literature, fencing, Spanish, equestrian studies, economics, taekwondo, spells and rituals, poetry. It is also specifically indicated that they do not have geometry classes. It's also worth noting that it is really emphasized in the series that vampires are highly skilled and revered in the arts. They're incredible musicians, they're incredible dancers, they're incredible sculptors, they're incredible writers. Like authors. Vampires are artists, and that's like part of what they're like innately good at is art. Not really indicated that they're innately good at science. I think maybe there's some retcons we can talk about in the other World Series about that, but I don't know if I actually want to get into that right now. But the point is, there's a very heavy emphasis on vampires and arts. I also want to talk about the scheduling related to this, like what the class schedule looks like. Zoe gets her schedule in marked, and it is included on page in the book, so we know her exact schedule per the first book when she first enters the school. It changes over the course of the series, but this is her schedule as it exists in the first book. At 8 p.m., so her first hour is vampire sociology, 9 p.m. is drama, 10 p.m. is literature, 11 p.m. is fencing, then she has a 12 a.m. Lunch break. It doesn't indicate the length of the lunch break, so I'm assuming it's an hour long. 1 a.m. is Spanish, and then 2 a.m. is equestrian studies. So her classes run from 8 p.m. and end at 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. It's also worth noting that second hour, Stevie Ray, who is like Zoe's roommate, specifically tells Zoe that she can choose electives of drama, sketching, or music. And Stevie Ray says that they take economics the next semester. So they don't take it when they first enter the school. It's something that they do in the second semester. Now, per the Fledgling Handbook, which is a companion book to the House of Night series, I don't know the exact year that it came out, but it was partway through the publication of the original series, they released the Fledgling Handbook. I think it was fairly late into the publication of the original series. I might look that up and put the date somewhere on the screen. But it should, the companion text should reflect the canon of the actual series. So I just want to read out what the schedule is per the Fledgling Handbook. At 7:45 p.m., this is when assemblies and general announcements would happen. I don't think there has ever been a pre-class assembly or announcements, not really. I don't think that's happened in the book. There have been classes interrupted for announcements and assemblies, and there have been after-class announcements and assemblies. So that doesn't feel particularly in line with established canon per the actual text, but that's neither here nor there. 8 p.m., sociology, okay, archaeology, philosophy, history. 9 p.m., literature and poetry, art and writing. 10 p.m., music, drumming, voice. 11 p.m., economics, computer sciences, math, business. 12 a.m., lunch. 1:30, foreign languages, anatomy, physiology, botany, quantum physics. Put a pin in that. 2:30 a.m., equestrian studies, fencing, pearl diving for Coastal House of Nights, yoga, tai chi, parkour for Urban House of Nights, interpretive dance, and warrior training. Not listed, it is worth noting that not listed in this curriculum in the Fledgling Handbook, despite canonically existing in the text of the series, this is a class that comes up multiple times, is spells and rituals, and also Taekwondo. Taekwondo was mentioned and marked because Stevie Ray's in Taekwondo. It's not listed in any of these classes for the curriculum. Also worth noting is that most of these timetables don't line up with the classes Zoe is taking and when she's taking them. Like, okay, sociology for first hour? Sure. For second hour, Zoe has drama. Drama is not listed for second hour. Is drama listed? Yeah, no, they also forgot drama class. Great. Her third hour is literature. Okay, yep, that's... Wait, no, is that? No. Third... Sorry, the more I look at this, the funnier it is about how like completely off everything is. Zoe has literature in third hour, but in the Fledgling Handbook, it lists literature as a second hour course and 10 a.m., which is third hour, as the time for like music and drumming and voice. But per the first book, second hour, 9 p.m., is when Stevie Ray said that Zoe could choose the electives of drama, sketching, and music. So why is music listed for... 11 p.m. Zoe has fencing when, per the curriculum listed in the Fledgling Handbook, that is when she would have economics or computer sciences or math or business. Zoe does not take any math classes of any sort at any point over the course of the series. She never does. Certainly not in her fourth hour period. And then the thing with lunch is that, like, it's not specified. I don't recall it being referred to as a lunch hour. Like, I looked through the text and I didn't find it being referred to as a lunch hour. But Zoe does make a comment of like lunch goes by just as quickly as it does in a normal school. So I would assume that means it's the same length as lunch at a typical high school. And my experience with high school is that lunch is an hour long. So I guess it's possible it's an hour and a half long. And this is just a different curriculum that I'm used to because it is in the States and I'm from Canada. And also like province to province, states to state, things can be different. But I think it's worth noting that lunch, per the fledgling handbook, is an hour and a half long. And then for 1 a.m., Zoe has Spanish. Yep, this does list foreign languages in that time slot. Interestingly enough, also science. And then 2:30 a.m. or 2 a.m., Zoe has equestrian studies. And in the fledgling handbook, 2:30 a.m. includes equestrian studies, but also fencing, which is what Zoe has at 11 p.m. So it's like all over the place, out of order, like none of it, so much of it doesn't line up with the actual text that it's like, why did you write this book this way? I also want to touch on the idea that they take quantum physics, they take anatomy, physiology, botany, and quantum physics. Okay, so notably, there are no just straight up biology classes, there are no chemistry classes, and there's no physics class. It is very important to note that these are students who are coming from conventional public American education system for the most part. I'm sure there's some private school kids or homeschool kids who end up getting marked, but the vast majority of the students at this school are coming from conventional, run-of-the-mill American public school system. In the case of this like the exact books, this also applies globally, so this would also apply to like Canada. But they're going from conventional public education system into the House of Night. So imagine coming from, say, a 10th grade science class, right? You haven't learned physics yet. You haven't had a physics class yet. Let's say you haven't had a physics class yet. You get to the House of Night, one of your options for classes is quantum physics. Thought there was someone at the door, it was just someone putting stuff in the mail slot. One of your options for classes is quantum physics, but you haven't had base physics yet. You haven't taken a physics class yet. And now you're taking quantum physics? How does that work? I also think it's interesting that like this is listed as like, now I haven't read the fledgling handbook. I'm getting this from the House of Night fandom wiki, and also like you can Google Books preview things, and so I can like check through the book that way. And I've also, like, this was a while ago, but I also like have gone to a bookstore and picked up the book and flipped through it. But it's worth noting that like I think this is presented as just like, this is what the curriculum is. If you go to a House of Night, these are the courses available. So I'm like, okay, so you're telling me if I go to Japan, the curriculum is the same. Like, obviously in a different language, but it's the same curriculum. Or if I go to like South America, or, right, like there's no cultural variation in what your education is. Different parts of the world have different education standards. I'm not explaining it very well, but like it just feels weird that like this is a universal curriculum, like globally. I would expect there to be some variation beyond like, oh, if you live near the ocean, you go pearl diving, which one, I don't think you can dive for pearls at any coast. I think that's regionally specific. Like I grew up on an island. I don't think I could go pearl diving on PEI. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh, and then the other variation is, oh, well, if your school is in a city, you can learn parkour. It just seems weird to me that like, and I guess another example would be like, you can take Tai Chi. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, I guess. But like, there's no like similar type of like martial art slash, Tai Chi is a martial art type exercise or movement that you could do that is specific to a different culture or region that would be more relevant to that House of Night. Like, I don't know. I'm not articulating it well, but I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to say is like, it's weird that the curriculum that exists in the States is the exact same in Japan, like the courses that are on offer, and it's just like the language is different. Like that just feels weird to me. I also think it's worth noting how much this series, the original series in particular, emphasizes the importance of arts over sciences. And like even in this kind of retconned curriculum in the fledgling handbook, where it does include some degree of math and science courses, it's worth noting that like it's really selective or like weird about what kind of science it includes. Like it seems like it's trying to include the sciences that sound like fancy, but it's not concerned with like foundational baseline understanding of science. Like, or even like math. You can take a math class. What math? Is it algebra, calculus, trigonometry? It's not geometry. We've been told it's not geometry. So like, what math are we taking? And the fact that the House of Knights specifically doesn't offer geometry is like, oh, okay, so I guess certain types of mathematical knowledge are not valuable. It's worth noting, geometry could be valuable in, I'm pretty sure, like architecture, which I feel like probably vampires value architecture, considering they try to have all of their houses of night. I think they do have all of their houses of night in like beautiful buildings. So architecture is something they value, which means an understanding of something like geometry, I'm pretty sure, is important. It shows a level of like devaluing of sciences and math, which, given that this is supposed to be a super elite school where you get an incredible education, it's really like, I think that's an interesting impact. I think it's particularly notable because like the series opens with Zoe being like, oh, I have to take a geometry test. I hate geometry. And then like part of the like silver lining of going to House of Night is, well, I'll never have to take geometry. And it's like, well, like I can understand that as a teenager, taking math classes is annoying and stressful, especially if you like aren't good at math, or like don't enjoy math. But it belies a lack of understanding of why math and science classes are important. It's not, learning a math class isn't important because you need to know geometry or you need to know trigonometry. Learning math is important because it's problem solving. This is coming from someone who isn't great at math. When I was in school, I could do math. But as soon as I'm done a math class, gone. It's not in my head anymore. But I can recognize that learning how to do math is important because education isn't just about retaining facts or learning information or getting the right answers on a test. It's working your brain in the same way that like, if someone goes and lifts weights, they're not like, yeah, I might have to be able to bench press 200 pounds at some point in my life, so I should work out to be able to do that. It's about exercising the muscle, because exercising your muscle is good. Like that's how you keep your body healthy. Now there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do that in terms of exercise. You could lift weights, you could go running, you could dance, you could play a sport. Like there's all kinds of stuff you can do. And the same is true with your brain. But it is important that you do various kinds of exercise. Just like you can't only lift weights. That's not actually that great for your body. You should also do some kind of cardio. And if you're lifting weights, you should do stuff with your legs, not just your arms. And like, you need to have a variety of things going on. And the same is true of working your brain. It can't just be reading and, I don't know, playing instruments. It also should be some amount of math, some amount of science, critical thinking. Like those things are important to the development of your brain and to your ability to like problem solve and interact with information and right. And it's particularly notable because like a point of pride of the series per the author is that she is a teacher or was a teacher. She was a high school English teacher. And so to her, she was writing a book that was reflective of teenagers in high school and of the high school experience. And so she, as an English teacher, wrote this series in which the ideal high school experience is not having to really learn math or science, particularly per the first book and the actual, like, what's shown in text. Again, Zoe never has a math or science class on page. We never see it. I don't mean like we never see her solving math problems on page. I mean, there is no point in the book in which she is enrolled in a math class. And so like the message to readers is that it's fine that you don't value math and science. You don't need it. Just read books and like music, and that's all you need to do, kind of thing. And even like getting on the track of like exercise and working out your body, even the kinds of exercise that's available is like weird, because like part of the thing that's established in the House of Night series, and we can unpack this later, is fledglings who are unhealthy, who don't take good care of their body, are more likely to reject the change. So there's an emphasis on exercise and physical activity in the curriculum. That's why in the Zoe's original schedule in the book, she has 2 forms of exercise during the day. She has fencing and equestrian studies, which is why it's weird that then in the fledgling handbook, all of the exercise related courses are bulked into one time slot because they're actually supposed to have exercise twice a day. But which, if you think about it, that's 2 hours of exercise a day. That's pretty intense. But also, like, even looking at the type of exercise that's available, okay, you have Taekwondo, Tai Chi, yoga, interpretive dance specifically, warrior training, what else is it? Equestrian studies, fencing, pearl diving, parkour. But there's no, like, weightlifting, sports. There's no, like, freestyle dance or ballet, calisthenics, or, like, there's nothing like that. And again, it's the notion of this is what sounds fancy and interesting and cool. And so that's what the author put in the curriculum, where, like, if you actually sit down and think about it, it's like, okay, yes, the kids are getting exercise, but also is there education about fitness? Is there education about taking care of your body? There's no, well, actually, no, there is technically a health class because that's what vampire sociology is. Their vampire sociology class is a mix of, like, there's some history stuff, like they learn about the Amazons, because in this series Amazons were vampires. They learn about, Amazonian vampires, but it's also about, like, here's what the change does to your body. So it's like sex ed also and biology kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, it's a little bit of, like, sex ed and health class and a little bit of biology class and a little bit a history class. That's not sociology. Again, I have a degree in sociology. I was getting my degree in sociology when I read this series. Do you know how much it hurt every single time I had to read something pertaining to the vampire sociology course? And I'm just like, no, not a single aspect of this is sociology. Nothing you are learning right now is sociology. Please stop. Please. Is Marx a vampire? Vote below. Do you think Marx would be a vampire in this world? Anyway, so yeah, just overall, the way the curriculum is laid out is, like, it reflects a poor understanding of, like, what education ideally should do, which is notable because this is supposed to be the most ideal version of a school. House of Knights are constantly praised for how amazing and wonderful they are and how much better they are than public education. So it should actually be better and more comprehensive than public education. Otherwise, you're lying to me. Now, in terms of what could have been done better, first of all, the way the curriculum's laid out in the fledgling handbook, don't lay it out by time slot, because obviously, like, first of all, presenting 8 p.m. to 3 p.m. as universally when the sun is down, because that's when vampires have their classes, is at night because the sun hurts them. So they have it during the darker hours, right? Even in Canada, 8 p.m. is not consistently dark, unless you're, like, very far. Well, even if you're very far north, it's not consistently dark because you have periods where it's dark all the time and periods where it's cold or bright all the time. So that doesn't work. But also, like, what about vampires on, I don't know, the equator? What are they doing? Surely their courses should be skewed a little differently because the time that it is sunny out is different. Maybe their schools are all in basements or something. I don't know. That already, like, just the idea of having it laid out in a specific schedule, and that applies to all the Houses of Night, doesn't make any sense. But also, of course, different schools are going to have courses lined up with different hours of the day. There's no reason to have these courses at a specific hour of the day. And it also doesn't make sense because it's like, okay, every single student who's going to take economics, and they have to take economics, is taking it at the exact same time of day. Now, granted, I don't know what the student population is in a given House of Night, but given that, as discussed previously, there is, say, one House of Night in the Himalayan region, I'm going to assume that that has a very large population compared to, say, the Tulsa House of Night. So if you have even just 500 fledglings marked in a year, which again, this is a region serving Himalayas is in between a bunch of extremely densely populated countries. Billions of people. So saying 500 fledglings get marked in that region in a year is not that dramatic. If you have 500 fledglings marked in a year, at some point you are going to have a class with 500 fledglings in it because there's only one time slot available for economics. Or you have to have like a bunch of teachers. Like, I guess you could have multiple teachers teaching it, but like, what class sizes are you allowing? Like, what class sizes are normative at that point? And like, what quality of education are you actually getting if you have, say, 100 students per class because you only have 5 professors for this course, right? Like, and particularly because this is supposed to not be like a typical high school class. It's supposed to be like really high quality education from incredibly knowledgeable vampires. So presumably you're not going to have the English teacher teach quantum physics because the quantum physics is going to be taught by someone who's an expert in quantum physics, which, I mean, it's not impossible that someone who's an expert in quantum physics is also an expert in literature, but, you know, probably not super likely. So, like, how are you doing that? What would have made more sense, I'm getting too in the weeds of this, what would have made more sense is if you had it laid out by, like, category of course. So, like, here's your core language courses. So, like, this would be a course relating to the language of your country. So that's your English literature in the States. Notably, there's no grammar classes. There's no writing and grammar classes. There's creative writing, but there's no, like, this is how English works classes, which is notable because this series was published by an English teacher. And then you could have categories of, like, these are your options for physical activity courses and, like, physical education. These are your options for sciences. These are your options for, right? Like, you could have it categorized that way. And then how a given school operates those classes is wildly variable and, like, open to variations per their needs and their location and their education. I think it would also be really worth noting that, like, in the fledgling handbook, maybe specify this is a fledgling handbook for American schools, because I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be more universal than that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it says otherwise in the text and I just didn't see that. So I either specify that this is a handbook for American schools, or say this is the core curriculum, but different houses of night will offer variations on this curriculum per their region and their culture and their standards, right? So, like, the courses you find in Japan might differ from the courses you find in Norway. Okay, bear with me. I'm going to be reading off my laptop for this clip because I did find a quote in the fledgling handbook that does kind of address some of these questions. I'll read it and then I'll talk about it, okay? But I'm going to be reading from my computer screen. Just bear with me. Fledgling curriculum. This varies for each individual house of night, but should you transfer to a different house of night upon realizing particular talents and affinities, there will be no penalties. We believe fledglings are most likely to benefit, regardless of if and when the change ensues, through education that is thorough, dynamic, and challenging. This commitment developed several hundred years ago as new attitudes launched the Renaissance movement in Western Europe and continues to expand in today's world. So your classes will reflect this. Integrated body, mind, and spiritual health will be emphasized at all times. Most schools begin at 8 p.m. and continue until 3 a.m. or later, depending on individual interests. Below is a standard school evening schedule with a variety of classes offered for each former year. So that's the other thing is the school is specifically modeled off the third former, fourth former, fifth former, sixth former structure, and specifically references that this is based off the, freshman, junior, yada, 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 which I find funny because I come from an area where we don't have that. School does not start or high school does not start at 9th grade. So the concept of freshman, junior, whatever, I don't understand. I literally don't know what order they go in because I've never had a school that employed that system. But it's talking about it as if that's like just a generally understood system. It is not. I will note that it says that the curriculum varies for each individual house of night, but then there's no real talk of how it varies. Like, does it mean the types of courses available vary, or specifically what's taught within the course varies? That is unclear. It also, like,
it says that, but then it says that this is a standard evening schedule, which means that like standard according to who, what school is considered standard. And also all of these schools are apparently based in Western European ideology stemming from the Renaissance movement, which is weird because like there's schools in Asia and South Africa. Like, what do you mean? Why would they be based on the Renaissance movement of Western Europe? Yeah, so it kind of addresses some questions, but then not really. Like there is a little bit of lip service paid, and the bigger thing is that it's not I guess it must be based on Western Europe as standard, and presumably from Western Europe also, like up the North America and other colonized, well, settler colonial places. But yeah, so I will acknowledge that some of this is kind of touched on, but this is still presented as a standard schedule, and it's unclear in what ways it varies. I just wanted to make sure I jumped in and added that because I did manage to find a place where I could view this page of the book.
I'm kind of started getting into earlier the idea that there should be transitional courses. There should be a transitional like semester basically, because the House of Night, you don't get marked at the beginning of a school year, right? You just get marked whenever your body starts going through the change, you get marked. So you could get marked in October, like Zoe does. Zoe gets marked at the end of October. So there's already been almost 2 months of classes underway before Zoe joins the school. So she's immediately behind. Not only that, the Tulsa House of Night serves multiple regions. It's not just people in Tulsa. It's not even just people in Oklahoma. It's that whole region of the states that people are going to that House of Night. Point being, there's students from all over attending this school, which also means there's students from different curriculums, different educational backgrounds coming to this school. There should be transitional classes to get students caught up not only to the standards of a House of Nights education, but also to get caught up on the fact that they entered in the middle of a semester, to get them caught up on the fact that they come from a different state, which has different standards and teaches different things compared to the home state of the House of Night, and just generally a period of time to adjust the fact that there's suddenly a fledgling and have to deal with not only, their body changing dramatically and possibly dying, but being in an entirely different education system. Certain things could be remain the same, like your elective courses where it's just like, oh yeah, you can just take like a music class. I'm like, sure, that's fine. That's, I think maybe that could be a little more lenient in terms of when you join, but economics or something, might be hard to join your economics course a month and a half into the course. And also you could have obviously your physical education courses you can just join. But yeah, it feels weird to me that there's no transitional period for fledglings joining the school. I could nitpick a whole bunch about like each course that's listed and why is this included but this isn't included, and what do you mean by the name of this course, and like how does this work in this region? Like there's all kinds we could do. For example, the inclusion of an archaeology course. I'm like, do you mean archaeology or do you mean anthropology? Because doing archaeological study, I mean, I guess you could do it by a textbook, but I feel like the House of Night would pride itself on having like hands-on education. Doing archaeology in, Toronto might be hard. Maybe you mean anthropology. Possibly you mean anthropology. But that would be getting nitpicky. I've already been nitpicky enough. The point is that there's a lot of gaps in this education. There's a lot of elements where it like feels like, again, considering the fact that this author was a teacher, she was a teacher at the time she started writing the series, it seems odd that there's so many oversights into like what are the actual needs of a student. Also just like what kind of education is prioritized and like put on a pedestal versus what's like, you don't really need that. You don't need a science class. Don't worry about it. And what's like added as an afterthought. Still figuring out where is the best place to place my camera and where on the staircase is the best place to sit. So change of scenery, different day, same topic. This is just going to be a quick, I always say quick, but the intention is for this to just be a kind of a quick overview of sort of the way the House of Night series presents social dynamics, I guess, of professors at the House of Night, like the way authority figures in the House of Night operate, particularly towards students. This is a topic that I might at some point do a bonus video for on Patreon, because I could go over specific quotes. But for now, I'm just going to give like kind of a general overview, and I especially want to talk about it in relation to the fact that PCcast is, as previously mentioned, a former high school English teacher, and she was a high school English teacher during the process of writing at least the early books. I think at least the first 3 books she was still working as a teacher. Conceptually, the idea is that fledglings, when they're marked, become legally emancipated and enrolled in the House of Night. And because they aren't, it's hard to explain. Their parents are no longer like their caretakers, their guardians. They're no longer legally responsible for their children. And so the parents don't have any grounds if their kid calls them up and is like, my teacher said this and that to me. The parents have no grounds to be on the teacher's ass and make their life hard, which I understand conceptually, because sometimes definitely parents complain about weird shit and get teachers in trouble for things that the teacher shouldn't be in trouble for. So, okay, the idea that a teacher can tell a student to, knock it off horsing around in class, and that student can't go run to their parents, say the teacher was mean to them, and then the teacher get in trouble at their job. Sure, conceptually that makes sense. I can understand that probably that is a thing that PCcast dealt with a lot as a teacher. However, the actual in-text examples of this happening, or like the way it is talked about, not so great. One particular example that jumped out at me from the very first book is there was this student named Elliot. And Elliot, in the first book, this is the first time we meet Elliot, he falls asleep in class. Now, there's a lot we can unpack about the idea of a student falling asleep in class and all of the reasons why a student might fall asleep in class, especially in the context of being marked and suddenly swept off to a House of Night. But the only context we need right now is this student fell asleep in class. Okay. At the end of class, notably, the teacher does not make sure that other students have left, because Zoe and her friends are still right there. Zoe overhears everything. So Zoe overhears the teacher, Professor Penthesilea, tell Elliot that he's failing at life and he's failing at being a man, because he's not living up to the expectations of a student, of a vampire, of a man. And he needs to like pull himself together if he's ever going to grow into a full vampire and be a warrior. And basically just like aggressively insults him in front of his peers, and then assigns him like this ridiculous essay assignment that's due the next morning. Okay, if your student is falling asleep in class, what makes you think they have the energy and wherewithal to write? I think it was like a 500 or 1,000 word essay or something that was due the next class, right? So it's like he still has his other classes to get to. And this was a day that they also had a full moon ritual after class. So like a school-wide full moon ritual. So like, what are you doing? Obviously he's going to fail at that assignment. How is he supposed to complete that reasonably? That's presented as a like, wow, this school is so cool because the teachers just don't put up with this kind of thing, and everyone's expected to perform to their best, and they don't tolerate people being losers. That's how Zoe keeps talking about Elliot. I could do a whole video about Elliot, by the way. I don't know if I will, but I could. And so that's like a whole thing. Like that's our first example really of like how great teachers can be at the House of Night because they aren't beholden to these standards of other schools. And then another example, I definitely do want to double check the exact quote, but again, that might be a Patreon bonus video that I unpack, but it was like talking about how, during fencing lessons, Dragon, that's the name of the fencing professor, Professor Dragon Langford, Dragon is able to, if students are horsing around and being dumb when they're practicing with their foils, he can tell them off and tell them like, stop doing that Sure, fine, conceptually that's great. You should be able to yell at people in a dangerous class if they're doing something dangerous. Though notably they are using a foil, not an actual like sharp blade. They're just using a practice sword. But you should still be careful with it. You could put someone's eye out. But it specifically goes on to like, I'm pretty sure the example is calling them idiots, calling them idiot children. And they can't go running to their mommies because their teacher called them an idiot children when they were acting like idiot children. And it's like, yeah, no, I don't think you should be able to like insult your students. It's one thing to be like, hey, fuck off, don't do that, that's dangerous. It's another thing to be like, you're a fucking idiot. Like, I don't know. Part of the reason why this upsets me in particular, and this kind of relates to the impact and implications section, is like, I was, for lack of a better word, bullied by teachers before, and most notably in first grade. My first grade teacher held me to different standards than the rest of my classmates. I'm not going to get into all of it, but like, I'd be held in for recess for coloring outside the lines, and I'd be called names in front of my classmates. So the idea that this is presented as like a good thing that teachers can do this is like, I don't think it is. Like, I have an anxiety disorder. I don't think we should condone talking to students this way, particularly because like, it's one thing, like, if this is an adult fencing class and you're talking to other adults and you're telling them, fuck off, don't be an idiot, that's different. But you're an authority figure talking to children. Like, these are kids between the ages of 14 and 18, right? So maybe it's not appropriate for a 200-year-old vampire to look at their 14-year-old newly changed student and say, you're an idiot. I don't know. I feel like maybe they're in a delicate place, and also just, you shouldn't talk to your students that way. And also just like getting more into the Elliot side of things, like, if a student is falling asleep in class, there's so many reasons that could be happening. Like, what if this student has depression? What if this student has a sleep disorder? What if this student is overburdened by the coursework because they didn't have a proper transition into this new curriculum and now they're really struggling, and that's reflecting in them just like not being able to put as much effort into the classes as you think they should, and like falling behind and falling asleep. Or it could be that they're understimulated by the course material. Maybe this is someone who did really, really, really well in classes. The one time I can remember almost falling asleep in class in high school is because I finished the work early and I was bored, and I like almost fell asleep at my desk. So like, it's entirely possible, this isn't the case with Elliot, but it's entirely possible that a student could be falling asleep in class because they're just bored. Either the material is too easy or it's just not interesting to them. And like, there's so many layers, especially because you're also dealing with a situation of this person some time ago was just going about their normal life, right? Going to school, being a teenager, dealing with teenager things. Then a vampire tracker shows up, recites a poem at them, and boom, there's a crescent moon on their forehead, and they're like, oh fuck, I'm dying. And they have to get to a house of night, and that's their life now. And they live with the constant threat of, by the way, you could reject the change at any moment in the next 4 years. Good luck. So like, maybe, I don't know, there could be some trauma that he's dealing with as well. In which case, yeah, just insulting him isn't going to help, and giving him a completely unrealistic homework assignment, like additional homework assignment, isn't going to help. And insulting him in front of his peers isn't going to help. Not only is the fact that this teacher is just insulting a student in front of other students like immediately a red flag, and I'm like, this is a terrible fucking school, but there's also no wellness checks on students when they show signs of struggle, which tells me that this is an absolutely horrible school to go to, because it has this incredibly high standard of education, as talked about in a previous section, with no transitional period, no transitional courses, and if you fall behind, you're insulted and punished. So, and again, this is written by a teacher. PC Cast was a teacher when she wrote that scene. So the implications of that are like troubling. A change of this would be like, either have there be some nuance and have some character at some point acknowledge that, hey, maybe this actually isn't a good system and that's kind of fucked up, and have some conversation about that, or change it so that there are actually student wellness services and transitional periods for students, and some kind of outreach done to help students who are struggling, like Elliot. It would be fine if that was shown on page and then Elliot like rejected those offers of help and continued as he was, that would be like, okay, well, that's a different conversation. I think this might be the last thing to really talk about in terms of like the House of Night as a school. I've talked about the locations and like distribution globally. I've talked about the curriculum and education standards, and I've talked about the way professors behave. Although I guess another quick thing to note is that there doesn't seem to be any educational requirement for the professors. There's a point where there's a character named Eric. He is a fledgling in the beginning of the series, but then later in the series he completes the change and becomes an adult vampire, and after he completes the change he becomes a professor, like immediately. Like, it's not even a week later he's teaching classes, and I'm like, hold on, what do you mean he's a professor now? Not like a teacher's aide, not like a classroom assistant, nothing like that. He is the professor. What do you mean? So also worth noting that apparently this super elite school with high educational standards, you can just become a professor immediately with no training. So that explains some things about why the standards for teachers are kind of fucky. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say for this segment of the video. Maybe I am wrong, and I will come back with more to ramble about later. But for now, put a school emoji in the comments if you made it to the end of the video. As always, like, comment, subscribe. That's appreciated. All support is appreciated. I also have a Patreon, as I have mentioned multiple times in this video. There'll be a link for it in the description. I would really appreciate if you joined my Patreon, especially if you want to see those bonus videos. Also, in the comments, if you have suggestions for bonus things you want talked about in Patreon videos, please let me know. That's all for this video. Okay, thank you. Bye!